many weddings have I done in my ministry? Or how many weddings did we do at Holy Innocents in Lahaina under Shirley's ministry, wedding coordinator? We had sometimes 5 weddings a day, 4 days a week in our church. And we saved 2 days for church business, but and for church weddings. But we had blessings of the Japanese who wanted to come over here and have a Christian and traditional wedding instead of just signing the book in Japan and being married. And they came in the big planes and often with their family and friends. They dressed in beautiful gowns and tuxedos that the company that brought them over had whole warehouses full of garments to choose from. They came to limousine. They had this beautiful setting. The services were done in Japanese. They were only a blessing because they were already married. Many of them were not Christian, but they wanted a church wedding. And they wanted it for some reason. And when they heard the words of the church wedding, the vows that were made, that their to-be husband was making to them, that I will be with you in sickness and in health, the brides quivered and started to tear up, because in Japan it seems that things had to be just right, and if a person was deformed or injured and was unable to be perfect, they would not be treated the same way as what the vows are now, that I will love you and honor and keep you in sickness and in health. At the end of the service, a video, of course, was made, and then they came into our house, the videography upstairs on our balcony, that looked out over the lawn and then the ocean, and then and palm trees there, and the ocean, and then Lanai in the distance. A beautiful setting for the cover portrait of their wedding album, and then all the shots on the beach. They took those things home with them. We gave them omiyagi, a gift. We gave them a gift telling about the church, telling about Christianity, telling them a little bit of the history of it, and where they could find an Anglican church in Japan, in all the different dioceses of Japan. So there was one somewhere near. And when we had some of the Japanese bishops came, and they loved what we were doing. Our bishop wasn't always that keen about it, but I made sure that we sent 25% of all of the church income from these weddings to the bishop of the diocese, and he didn't complain too much. The cathedral also did weddings, so that was another closer thing. I think we got the bishop on our side on that. How many weddings, how many blessings, how did that feel to us, to them, to the congregation? I was reading, we found an old iMac computer that Shirley had, and we opened it up and plugged it in, and it came up with just a few things that were in it. One was her writing a letter to the bishop about the weddings, and weddings had been called fake weddings by some, because we didn't really marry them, and it was more of a show for some people than it was a spiritual experience. So this was about the fake weddings and how the brides, some of the things that I just said, how the brides felt when these words were said to them, how people, because the church was open right on the main street of Lahaina, the windows were open on the side, and people would often want to come and see the church. It was on a historical tour, and our wedding coordinator would invite them to come in and sit back in the back somewhere where they're out of the way, and they could watch the wedding. They were welcome. A homeless man came in and felt very uncomfortable. At the end, he smiled and he tipped his hat every time he walked by the church, and often came in to be quiet and say a prayer or two. Other people came in and had the same kind of reaction. Always welcome, even though these fake weddings were taking place. Always beautiful, always lovely music, and the setting, a beautiful church. If you've never seen that, go to see that if you're in Lahaina. Right almost next door to the banyan tree. So Jesus went to a wedding. Mary was there. You notice in John's Gospel, Mary is never mentioned by name, only the mother of Jesus. But they were running out of wine, and in a small village, the wedding was a big thing, a big thing. Everybody in the community was invited, and the festivities went on for a week, with all the food and drink that you wanted or could have, and people would come and go during that week. And Jesus and his disciples came. Maybe they weren't expected, they were invited, but not really expected when they laid in a supply of wine for everyone. And toward the end of the week, the wine was running short. And so Mary said to Jesus, as we heard in the gospel, they're running out of wine. And he says, "Woman, what is that to me and to you?" Sounds not like a very kind thing to say, but the word woman had this wonderful, glorious idea around it. The woman was the queen of heaven. The woman was the light of God in God's eye, the sparkle in God's eye, the person who God married along with the rest of us, as we heard in the Old Testament reading. That the wedding was a celebration between God and his creation. So woman didn't have that derogatory or negative kind of feeling that the translation has, I believe. What does it have to do with you and to me? My hour has not yet come. So how is Jesus, is he looking at his watch and saying, "Oh, it's not time yet"? Or is he looking at his life and his death? In John's Gospel, he says this with every sign that he makes. They don't call them miracles. He calls them, John the evangelist calls them signs. Pointing. What a sign does, it points to something. It shows you the way. It shows you how to get there. The burning bush was a sign for Moses when he turned and God gave him the 10 Commandments. The sign of Jesus' miracles were a sign pointing to who he was as God's incarnate Son. God incarnate, God in his Son. All of them did that. And his hour was his final sign, his great mystery, his great miracle on the cross with his arms outstretched, where he overcomes death and comes back to life in 3 days. 3 days. That's how this story begins. In 3 days, there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee. Cana is only about 3 or 4 miles from Nazareth, where Jesus was from. So he went there. He went to the wedding, and when he realized that his mother asked him to do something, and yet it wasn't his time, it was the time for all of those people who were at the wedding, and especially for the family and the wedding couple. For them, it was an important thing. If they ran out of food or wine, they would be ridiculed the rest of their lives. They would be outcasts almost in their own community. So Jesus saw the needs of the people, and he forgot about his own timetable and turned this water, about 120 gallons, into wine. Now, he doesn't say he turned it, he just said fill the jugs with the big things about this big probably, fill them with water, and then take some to the steward, and take it to the steward, and it's great wine. Why would he make so much wine? It's not that he wasn't belong to the Women's Christian Temperament unit at all. That wine, how many times is wine mentioned in both the Old and the New Testament? Wine that gladdens the heart, a little wine for thy stomach's sake, the wine of the new era, where the streams will flow with wine and joy, and people will be glad and be filled. Joy and gladness and filledness is what Jesus wants from us. Not a bunch of sad sacks, Not a bunch of sorry people, but happy people who can laugh with Jesus. Somebody gave us once a card with a picture of Jesus just hilariously laughing. And I put that up in the sacristy so I always remember to smile before the service. Looking at this. And this old guy was just such a saint in a ragged disguise. He was this wonderful person, sent postcards to people all the time, and often with clippings, cut out little bits of words and stuff to make a story. He was, I thought he was a saint. Not everybody. He had been a restaurateur, and he'd always bring, when we had a potluck, jugs of cheap wine. He says, this is as good as any of that other stuff that people bring. Well, I guess it's what you get used to. But anyway, it was his gift all the time. And he gave me a couple of books of Paul Tillich's sermons, which I cherish, and a little poem that he had written about how, when he found out he had cancer, it was a wonderful thing because it focused his life on the short time that he might have left, and how he could better his relationship with people, and how he could bring the story of his faith to all of us who saw him and read his stuff, got his postcards. A wonderful guy, Bill Shields, will always remember him. So Jesus turns the water into wine, and everybody goes on with the party, and the party is filled with joy. Is that what really happened? Is that really what happened? You know, the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Synoptic Gospels, tell about Jesus' story, what he did, the miracles, the teachings, the healings, and the conflicts that he had with the Pharisees and so on. They tell almost the same story a little differently because they were written from different perspectives, who they were written for. So one written for the Hebrews, one written for the Greeks, and John is different. He has the story of this wedding in Canaan. None of the others do. He has the water turned into wine. None of the others do. What's he trying to tell us? What is he doing? Not a history. He's telling us, like a signpost, look at this. This is who Jesus is. This is what Jesus does. This is what you can do. Follow Jesus and do the same. I tried that by making wine. I made 120 gallons one summer or fall after we harvested a vineyard that a friend of mine had, next door neighbor, was project engineer for Food Machinery Corporation, and he was making a grape picking machine. So they had to trellis out the vines a different way so the machine could go and pick them than what they had before. So the vineyards were interested in this because it was certainly labor saving, but it took a while for the vines to grow out on these trellises. So the machine comes in and picks about half of them. Now there's not enough, these are small vineyards, test vineyards. There's not enough for them to now go pick the grapes. And so they said, you can have them. So we went down there with big garbage cans and filled them full of grapes and brought them home. Had our children stomp them out in their bare feet in big buckets. And we did have a crusher because there was too much of that to do. And the garage was filled with jugs of wine fermenting. It really smelled good. You could smell it a block away. And the wine was not too bad. Some of it was very good, but some of it wasn't so good. And we did blind tastings. We had wines, different kinds of wines, put bags over them and numbered them. And the people and we went through the Amorim scale, the 10-point scale of wine tasting. The people who gave my wine the highest score got to take home the case. So there was a few liked it, and not everybody likes it. It's the same thing with these stories. Some people like them, and some people don't. The same with the religion. Some people like it, and some people don't. But those of us who do like it, who do drink the wine of the New Testament, the wine of the new age, are filled with joy and love and abundance that we can then go out and change the world with our love, we can change the world. Amen.
Amen.